Good morning. It is Thursday, March 28th, and we will call the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting to order at 9:30. I'd like to welcome our huge gallery here. Thank you for being here, and I'd like to acknowledge that we're within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. So first we have adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions? Okay, so somebody to move the agenda? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And item number 2, Director Pratt. This is verbal with regards to Electoral Area Services Standing Committee. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. This is it's presented here as the start of a conversation that, or the continuation, I should say, of a conversation that the electoral area directors have been having, and also in light of what goes on in other regional districts, of having an electoral area services standing committee to deal with the rural area issues. It's quite common, for example, Squamish-Lillooet, they meet, because they are a more geographically spread out area, they have their electoral area reps meet the day before their regular board meeting, then they just stay over and then do their committee meetings and everything the other day, or the next day. And so it would be a committee that would deal with rural issues, which would then in turn take those off of the other committee agendas. So it bears a further conversation, because I've also heard that the municipal directors really enjoy being part of those conversations, and with the regional aspects of many of the issues that we're dealing with right now. After I first asked for this, it's to be put on an agenda to start the conversation about having just a separate committee. I've heard from the municipal directors that they like hearing everything, speaking more of committee of the whole type things anyways. And then with our strategic plan coming into place, it might be something that we may want to just hold off on for right now, but I wanted to get it out in front, because I know it's been a conversation for the rural directors, because we feel disconnected in some ways, and wanting to connect with one another in a more formal way than just in workshop form, and more regularly. So that's the introduction of the item, and I'll put it out to the board for your conversation.
Sorry, would anybody like to comment? Director McMahon.
I think certainly for the first year, there's a big need for training. I wasn't seeing the Rural Directors Forum so much as making decisions as getting more information, because we have to deal with so many issues that are so complicated and involve overlapping jurisdictions. So I was at the APC last night, and they started asking me questions about Bylaw 310, and I was not really able to answer adequately, because it's complicated, and most of us just don't have the background to understand it.
Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. The issue of the rural directors, it's a lot to deal with, and I also would say I have enjoyed the feedback from the municipal directors very, very much. I highly value that, both as a newly elected and the whole of the board, the unity. I find that very beneficial. What to do with it in the future? Yeah, I'm listening. And we did talk about the issue of quorum. 5 rural directors does constitute quorum, which is one of the issues that we've been sort of talking about. And the support group that we have right now, where we get the information, I found that really valuable. So I'm not sure which one is the best to go forward, but I still do like our informal support group meetings. I think that's what they have been, kind of.
Director Beamish?
I guess for my benefit, learning as much as I can about the rural area while I'm still a municipal director is very, very important, because I see a lot of issues that you guys have that that we don't quite share, but there is a lot of overlap. And one of the things, just example that we're going to do in Gibson's, we get a number of questions about different things. So I've asked staff to actually put a workshop on for our council members on development permits, focusing on the three main projects that have been issued, where the development permits were issued last year prior to our arrival, because the public knows more about them than we do, quite frankly. And so that's the kind of thing you can do at a workshop type or a meeting type. Have a focus of some aspect of projects, even history. How did we get here? What's the history of that sort of thing? And so that and all sharing that information together. I also occasionally will get interact with the interface people area, the rural areas, so that it's important to understand what those issues are. So,
Director Theis?
Yeah, well, from my understanding that the majority of the rural area only issues are mostly discussed in the planning and community development committees, where you get about 90% all rural areas issues going. And I've really appreciated having the input from the municipalities, or even having a chair be from the municipality, because they can be impartial and kind of run the show while we focus on our issues. So I've really appreciated that, but I'm also conscious of the fact that we're doing a bylaw 310 review, and that's going to take up a whole lot of bandwidth over the next little while, where the municipalities aren't really super involved in that. So I'm just wondering if it might be an idea to at least to create this committee during this period of the bylaw 310 review, and then move forward from there.
Anyone else? Director Pratt?
Thank you. And I certainly I hear what everyone's saying, and I think that probably the workshop formats that we had been using, because were very valuable for all of us to have that conversation. Just the biggest concern is we are at quorum, as mentioned, or when with the rural directors. So we need to be really careful in the conversations we have, that it's about learning, and it's not about moving business forward as a board, which is why the committee conversation is being brought forward, and one of the reasons why it's being brought forward. If we wanted to look at striking an ad hoc rural area committee or just arranging with staff to maybe have a couple of more regular workshops, just with very specific rural issues, just to help us continue. Keeping it separate maybe from our lunch and learn. It's essentially, if we did want to strike another committee, it's up to the will of the board. But I'm also very cognizant of staff time as well, and just striking another committee to have a committee that may already be being served by our other standing committees. But maybe the workshop format is a better way of bringing that forward on a more regular basis. So,
Okay, I'm going to weigh in first before I turn over to you. I want to give you some examples of how being here, even though we may not have any say in the decisions, has an impact in the municipalities. I recently attended an active transportation workshop, and knowing that MOTI handles all the roads in the regional district, I could actually support the recommendation that the Ministry of Transport really look at their role in connections between communities, right? So in Gibson's and in Sechelt, we're looking at building bike paths, but it doesn't do us any good if they can't get from Gibson's to Sechelt. So, but knowing that the Ministry of Transport, right? So it's having that context. So that's one. the couple of things in planning that have come here that I've taken off to our staff is the geotech report that came through, I think it was at the beginning of our term here. They were talking about what kinds of framework we want the geotechs or the engineers, et cetera, to look at. Like, example of something happening 1 in 200 years, for example, 1 in 100 years, those kinds of things. Take that off to our staff. Also, the dynamic zone that came back last week. We have some agricultural land in West Sechelt. And yesterday I was in a conversation with somebody. First of all, I talked to our staff about that, and Director Lambert brought that up as well with our staff. And yesterday I talked to somebody who's very interested in West Sechelt and tying it into tourism, so doing some agritourism. So again, that's something else that came up here but has applicability. And then Bylaw 310. As we know, businesses on the Sunshine Coast don't just work in one jurisdiction. So they're moving up and down the coast, and they're subject to dealing with the differing bylaws, et cetera, everywhere. So the more information we can have, we can actually start making sure that our staff are aware of things and have those conversations when we have discrepancies, so we can look at maybe not changing them, but being aware of them. So when somebody comes, we say, well, yes, you can do this in the regional district, but no, you can't do that in the district of Sechelt. So even inside the bylaw 310, I think it's a conversation that it may raise things that we need to look at. Right now in Sechelt, our staff are looking at redoing our zoning bylaw, our official community plan, and our subdivision and development control bylaw. So we're looking at probably within the next year, all of those are going to be new. So conversation that's happening here will definitely be applicable to the work that we're doing there. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Well put. I was actually going to put it the same points, but from a rural area. We can learn as well. And so I'd be more in favor of a workshop way of approaching it. And when you know the subject, you can choose to attend or not. So that would be how I would see it happening, I think. Thank you.
So it sounds like what we might want to do is bring the conversation back in a year, right? Let's see how this year plays out, and in a year come back, revisit it, and see if at that point that would be something to do. Okay? Any other comments? Director Pratt?
I'll just finish up and thank you for the conversation, and because it was something that had come up after LGLA, I just wanted to make sure we started the conversation now, and I'm happy to continue. We'll sit down and figure out some topics, or the board can, the rural directors can send topics of items they're interested in, and staff and I can figure out workshop formats maybe, and I don't know do we need a board resolution on any of that? I don't think so. It's kind of the format we've been using already.
Thank you. I just think that if you want to revisit the issue in a year, if you make a recommendation, that helps us for tracking purposes.
Go ahead.
Okay. So that the board revisit the conversation of striking a rural electoral area services standing committee in, let's say, Q2 2020.
Is there a seconder? Seconded? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Go ahead.
Q2 gets us out of budget season.
Yeah. All right. So first, I'd like to have a motion to receive all the reports. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And then we'll go to Annex A, pages 1 through 3, and we'll turn it over to our acting CAO.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. This report is a bit of a housekeeping issue. The SCRD has 4 resolutions going forward to the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities for debate. And traditionally, the board designates a speaker for each of those resolutions in the event that there is some debate or an introduction to the resolution is required. And staff will, of course, provide some briefing notes to go with those directors to the convention so they have a bit of extra context.
So we're not just going to put them out there and leave them on their own. I got it. Okay, so the first one is parking enforcement in rural areas. Who would like to speak to this one? Director Hills?
I have a question of staff. It's about the resolutions, and the AVICC 2019 resolutions talks about, it lists them, and there's some that are endorsed and some that are the climate change is not recommended. So I'm trying to understand the difference between when the AVICC endorses it or has it not recommended. So is it going to actually come to the floor? That's the question that I have of staff.
And I don't think staff know that at this point. That's why we typically prepare everybody for all of them. And that plays out on the floor at AVICC. And did you want to comment, Angie?
Sorry, I haven't looked at the resolutions book. If they're specifically endorsed by the resolutions committee, they'll definitely come to the floor. If the resolutions committee has already recommended an action that, I'm just not aware of, such as not admit for debate, they usually have some other action, whether it's referred to the executive or something for further follow-up. But at this point, if we're prepared to speak to them as they come, that just helps us be prepared.
Another piece about the endorsement is sometimes they'll come forward in a block, and sometimes they'll come forward separately. If they come forward as a block, they can be pulled out of the block and debated separately if need. If not, you may not ever speak to it, and it might just be passed as a group. But it's just, are we prepared to speak to them should we need to do that? Okay. So number 1, parking enforcement in rural areas. Who would like to speak to that one? Director Lee?
Yes, Chair. We have a problem big time up in the harbor, so very familiar with the subject.
Okay. Number 2 is logging in the urban interface. Director McMahon? Good choice. Number 3, climate emergency declaration. Director Ties. And number 4, intergovernmental collaboration on land use planning. Sorry? Yeah, okay. Director Pratt. So we need a motion that, I think you can probably put Terry, you can probably put so that the committee appoint the directors as identified to speak to the Sunshine Coast Regional District resolutions at the 2019 AVICC, AGM, and convention, and you'll list them in the recommendation. Okay, so someone to make that recommendation? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, so Annex B. And is it GM Hall that's speaking to this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. This report recommends award of a 3-year janitorial contract for service at the Seashell Aquatic Centre, and the award is to Tricom Building Maintenance Limited. The scope of services is overnight facility cleaning, and this contract replaces one established in January of 2017 for which the contractor was not able to sustain service. The scope of work is unchanged from that prior contract. In keeping with SCRD purchasing policies and contract language, a public bidding process was undertaken, and board authority for contract awards over $100,000 is required. As noted in the report, the new contract value is approximately $30,000 higher than the former value. Operating reserve funds are available to support this gap for the remainder of 2019, and contract values would be updated following award in the financial plan for future years. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Beamish.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Can I ask a question, please? Why we don't see at least a table summarizing the other proposals that were submitted and the costs and the evaluation of them? There's nothing wrong with putting that into a report so that we, in making that decision, understand where this one rated and what the other proposals were financially. Thank you.
And staff?
Thank you, Chair. So staff can look into that. I think that typically our award reports, typically we're in camera, so I think that it's an evolving issue as far as what we can disclose from a proprietary information for some of the contract values. So I think we can take that back and present some more information. Another thing too is we're going to be updating the purchasing policy, and along with that is sort of our procedural type of processes as well that will align with some of that. So again, moving to a more transparent process is, I think, where the regional district is headed. So I think we can take that into consideration and look at how we could do that in the future.
Follow up?
Yeah, just looking at the table that is in here that deals with the one proponent, that same information being available for all three would not be proprietary information. The proprietary comes in really in their rates, their detailed rates, as opposed to their end values, and that's why you could have all three of them with this additional, with this same information on the table.
Thank
in
you.
my view.
I know in the municipalities we typically see that information. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Director Hiltz.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think this is a question for staff. It's about in 2017, the contracts was awarded for both the Seashell Aquatic and the Gibsons, and so it looks like the contract was split out because the contractor couldn't do the Seashell one, but they're going to continue with the Gibsons contract. Is that? I'm just making sure that it's been split now, I think.
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Late in 2016, the regional district went out for janitorial service contracts for a number of facilities, and those were awarded on the basis of best value at the facility level. So in the case of Gibsons and District Aquatic Facility, it's a different contractor providing services there than was awarded at Seashell Aquatic Center at that time. So separate contractor. That contract remains in place, and service is being provided. The scope of this particular award is only for one facility for Seashell Aquatic Center. Thank you.
So I have a question around the information in the report, and I don't know if this is something that you can share publicly. They indicate that they're no longer able to service it due to increased operating costs. Was that internal to their business or inside of the scope of the project or materials or, like what actually led to that? And I don't know if that's something you can answer publicly. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Chair. The information that staff has is that the bid price was not sustainable for that contractor. And staff don't have specifics on whether it's labor or materials related, but as a general comment on service-type contracts with a high labor component, cost of living and the cost of labor is a primary factor in the ability to sustain the service provided through those types of contracts. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hills?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on that theme of is it the value is like a 50% increase from one year to the next, right? The sustainability. I blanked. So it's that. How does a contractor? They have a contract for I think it was a 3-year period. How do they get out of that aspect of the? They give you a notice that they're not sustainable. They're essentially they're ending the contract, I guess, is how they're doing it. So how do they do that?
Mm-hmm. Staff.
Thank you, Chair. SCRD contracts include standard contract provisions that allow for either party to terminate the contract or amend the contract under certain circumstances subject to notice provisions. In the case of increasing the value of the contract, that is not flexibility that's included with the contract. Wouldn't be fair to other bidders to start changing the price. So in this particular case, there wasn't the ability to negotiate the value of the services being provided, which triggered the need for a new open and competitive bidding process.
Any other questions? So we have some recommendations on page 4. And this is all voting except Area A. So I'd look for someone to move those recommendations if you choose. Director Pratt. Is there a seconder? Director Hills. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Annex C. This is the grant status update, and we'll be looking to Ms. Perot.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report provides details on recent application notifications, pending grant applications, or grants received and in progress or completed and are provided for information on a quarterly basis to the committee. So the SCRD applies regularly for grants to undertake projects which align with the financial plan or the board's strategic initiatives. Staff are continuously monitoring for new funding opportunities and report back on new application intakes and opportunities as program details are announced.
Thank you. Any questions? Director Hills.
Yeah, thanks very much. I guess I was looking at page A. There's 2 questions, I guess. We call them grants, and I'm looking in the financial plan, and are the grants embedded in the government transfers, or are they in the other revenues? And then the other question is, like the infrastructure on Chapman Lake expansion, I'm not sure if we've decided, do you cancel that if it's not going to go through, or how do you remove your request for funding if that's necessary?
And staff.
Thank you, Chair. So again, to answer the first question, so the grants are typically included as government transfers. So it really depends on how we've received the funds too. Are they paid in advance? Are they paid in progress reports? So it typically depends, but generally it's government transfers because it's for restricted purposes from the financial statement presentation. In relation to the second question, for the outstanding grant application for the Chapman Water Expansion Project, which there is a pending report to come to a future committee on sort of the implications of removing that particular project because it's currently in the financial plan. So staff need to present that. So there is an outstanding grant application, and one of the steps within that particular process would be to contact the grantor and notify them of the project no longer probably being on the books. So that's one of the steps that we'll need to address.
Director McMahon?
I was just curious about the Grantham's Hall grant application because it was in May of last year. That's almost a year ago. That seems like a long time to be outstanding, and I was wondering if there were any extenuating circumstances.
And staff? That's on the first one under pending grant applications.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff are also take note of the long window for evaluation there. In the intervening time, staff have been in contact with the grant officer and understand that a decision is imminent. Thank you.
Director Pratt.
Happy news that I heard on the news or heard on the radio this morning is that the Child Care Planning Program grant was received by the District of Sechelt, which we are a party to. So that's a great update there, and just thanks to staff for the putting together the. It's interesting to see all of these in progress and wondering what how, like, for example, as Director McMahon brought up, like that long application almost a year later waiting to hear is pins and needles.
I have that highlighted on here, but I know that we had heard a couple of days ago, but we couldn't say anything until it was made public. So now it's been made public. It's good. Okay. Director Tighe.
Yeah, right in the federal budget that the gas tax has been increased for this year, and I'm wondering if we need to up our ask, or if that automatically happens, or if this is for this calendar year or for next calendar year. Thank you.
Staff?
Yeah, so there's many different streams related to gas tax funding. So there's Community Works Fund, which is per capita basis. So that's based on a prior agreement with the federal government, filtered through UBCM. So what staff have already earmarked is to provide some background information on Community Works gas tax funds to a future Corporate Administrative Services Committee. We sort of have it flagged for April. Because there's a lot of information as to what projects are eligible. There are also several other streams through gas tax, so strategic priorities funding. So there's also several other sort of green initiatives within gas tax. So it really depends on when those intakes are and how you apply for them. So as far as the federal budget goes, staff are monitoring those. And of course, we scan when the intake comes in, what matches with the eligible and ineligible. Then we typically bring reports to the board for that. So it's mandated through the federal government and usually filtered through UBCM. So to then request for us to get an increase, they're mandated and they're usually project specific. And the Community Works gas tax funds is a separate stream. So
I've been watching this because of the other business that I do, because there have been some announcements in there too. And one of the articles I read last night, I think, was that while they've announced it, it hasn't actually passed yet. So they haven't passed their budget. So once they pass it, then information will be filtered out through UBCM. So I would anticipate we'll probably hear something in September when we go to UBCM about particulars. Okay, Director Pratt?
Just a general question for staff on is there like a kind of like a laundry list of shovel-ready projects for when the right grant happens to come out as part of the work plan, I guess?
Staff?
the short answer is yes. So essentially, we have a whole bunch of projects that are approved as work plan items and or pending. And then, of course, as the strategic plan, the new board strategic plan gets aligned, then we'll do another scan. But again, what staff would comment is that even though we do our scans, there have been some different examples where information will not be filtered through a very public method. And so it might come to you. So we always encourage, if even the elected officials hear of anything, don't hesitate to pass it along to staff, because there's been one or two announcements that have been kind of under the radar that staff were not aware of. So we like to share information, and we use sort of a cross-functional team approach. So,
Director Hiltz?
Following up with the staff in terms of the phrase goes search diligently, and we're told that I'm thinking that they're asking if we see anything that we remotely suspect that could be a grant, we should forward it on, even though we think that they might have it. So it's about adequate resourcing, and are we missing any opportunities? And whatever way it comes, fire it your way and let you decide if it's relevant. I think, is that what I'm hearing?
yes, I think that's a good way to do that.
Okay, I have a question about one on page 8. Last one in the first table, Economic Development Readiness Program, ICE-T, with regard to hillside development. It says it's pending, but it also indicates there's no funding request amount. So I'm just wondering where we are in the status of that.
Thank you for the question, Chair. That project is on the work plan for 2019. It has been scoped. At this stage, no detailed application has been created, so hence no specific funding amount request identified at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. And I know at the last couple of meetings that we were at ICE-T, they have actually changed some of the categories. So if you're looking at applying under some of them, you might want to revisit those. They've added one, but they've also fine-tuned some of the others. And I think we probably received some information that if it's not clear enough, they've actually, like online, they've actually given us some information about what does qualify under and what doesn't, what they will not fund. So we could pass that information on if it's not. I think it's online, but if you have any questions, just ask us. Any others? I have one more. The next page, second one down, Regional Water Cross Connection Control and Universal Metering Program Phase 2. This would be the program that's in progress now, right? Staff?
Yes, Chair. So that was the second phase, so the rural areas metering program, and so that has just been completed. So I think the final submission has been done, so the next update report will probably close that one off.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, let's move on to Annex D, Board Procedure Policy. So this has come forward for input from the board. I know there have been questions about process, so there'll be different things. Is there anything that people would like to address that we would like to see changes made to the bylaw or want to discuss about the bylaw? Director McMahon.
I have a longish list. So I thought I'd maybe do two. I'm doing them in order, and then if people have ones, we can try and tackle them in order somehow. Can you herd us along through this process? One of my first questions was in number 4, 3, number 4, section 3. Regular meetings of the board must be adjourned no later than 3 hours from the scheduled time of call to order unless otherwise determined by a 2/3 vote of the members present. I'm just pointing out that we haven't been doing that. So, I want to flag anything that if we're not actually following it, either we need to follow it or maybe we need to remove it from the bylaw. Then I didn't have
I'm going to talk to that one first, too. I had highlighted
Okay.
it, too, so I think that's
All right.
one we should probably turn over
Good.
to staff to address. Do we need to change this, or is this something that we need to, this is number 4, subsection 3 on page 15.
Thank you. I'm just doing a quick cross-check here. That applies to board meetings and not to committee meetings. So I don't think we've had any board meetings that have gone longer than 3 hours.
Thank you. That clarifies that. Next.
I don't have another one until section 10, unless anybody else does.
That's where mine are too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have one in 5.
Okay.
Just a question. It says that notice of regular meetings would be posted at the public notice posting place. Where is that?
Thank you, Chair. It's the bulletin board outside in the lobby here.
Okay. So if the building was closed, could people actually see when the meetings were? I'm just looking at where is it?
Thank you. From the front door, no, they would not be able to see that. Of course, there's other ways of getting that information, and we don't get a lot of foot traffic here as we would as we previously did downtown Sechelt. So
Okay. Okay. Any others? And you said number 10 was where you were going next? Okay. Any others before number 10? Director Hills.
Yeah, this is a section 3 application of the rules of procedure, and it doesn't specifically say the Sunshine Coast Regional Hospital Board, which is a separate corporate structure, so whether that needs to be included to make it looks more like a housekeeping issue. That's one of the, whether that has to be in here for the applicability of this to that board.
Staff?
that's a good question, and something I'd like to look at a little further. They are 2 separate corporations, so it wouldn't likely be appropriate for an SCRD bylaw to give itself application to the regional hospital district, but from the regional hospital district might be something that we could follow up further.
Okay, next. Dr. Hiltz.
It was following up about the public notice. Housekeeping, you could add the website as an alternate as a public notice posting and/or the SCRD website as a place. And I am noting that this bylaw did come. There's a major revision in March of 2018, I believe. So this is sort of the first attempts at amending the 717, I believe. So it seems appropriate.
Director Beamish?
I believe there's a legal requirement under the charter or as to where you post your notices. And there is a public posting area, and notice of meetings and things like that. So I'm not sure the website, so it could be an additional, but it wouldn't be the legal notice boards or things. So.
And if you look at number 2, it actually indicates posting a copy of the agenda on the regional district's website unless prevented due to technical issues.
Yeah.
So that's covered off in there. Director Hiltz. And Director Beamish, could you turn your mic off, please? Director Hiltz.
Sorry.
Is section number 6 about notice of special meetings, and in the case of emergencies, and there was a mention of section 2204, which is about how I'm thinking of it in terms of the evaluation of the emergency preparedness, and in the case of an emergency, you can have the consent of the chair and 2 directors without 5 days and not even notice. So emergency kind of procedures, and about aligning this procedure with the emergency preparedness. So I'm just wondering about the section 2204 of the Act and whether that needs to be included as a housekeeping issue.
Staff?
Those are actually sections of the Local Government Act. So there is an order of precedence. We first deal with legislation, bylaw, policy, and organizational custom. So because the rules for giving meeting notice are first and foremost in the legislation, a lot of it hasn't been repeated in the bylaw, or the bylaw could be significantly longer than it already is.
Thank you. Any others? Any more before number 10? So let's move to number 10.
Thank you. I want to open this up for a discussion about how we review agendas and who reviews agendas, because in other organizations I've been involved with, the chair of the meeting is involved in setting the agenda. So I'd kind of like to take a look at how other people feel, and also the timing, because of course this all has to work in terms of getting the agendas published sufficiently in advance of the meetings.
And would someone like to speak to that? You're looking to put up your hand, Director Beamish?
I guess my only comment is that the agenda review that we have before a meeting is very helpful. And if I, as a chair, were to think that there's something that was lacking or could be added, I would bring that forward at that time and suggest that maybe an additional item be put on. But the agenda review, I think, is certainly very helpful to me. We do do that at the municipal side as well.
I think Director McMahon is looking at something a little different. So I don't know what your process is at your municipality, but I know that there's an agenda coming out this Friday. I actually get the agenda for review, and so does the chair of that meeting, if it's a committee of the whole. We get that agenda on Thursday and review it before it gets published on Friday, so that we can say, is there something missing in the report? We had something happen at one of our meetings, and I didn't see it on the agenda, so I called the director of director of planning and said, I don't see this on here. Was it missed? And found out that no, it's going to be coming later, and this is why. Right? So it was actually, because we're aware of what's going on, we actually can have input into the agenda, either taking something off or putting something on. And I think that's what Director McMahon's looking at. And I don't know how that would work with staff. Director Pratt.
This is one of the ones I had on my list as well, because we, at the school district, we had we had a very different process because the agenda setting committee was actually chaired by the chair of the board, and with senior staff at the table and actually setting the agenda as well as the committee, so committee agendas as well as the agenda for the board. They did it on a monthly basis, which obviously couldn't be. You couldn't do that here, but just because of the number of agenda items and the diversity of the items that have to come up over a month, and sometimes things are more time sensitive that they may not come up until about 8-9 days before the committee meeting. So being the board chair of the organization and not actually having any input into an agenda until actually it's been after it's been published has been a bit of an eye-opener, I guess, for me, because it is a committee of the board. Understandably, the majority of the items coming up are being set by staff because they're statutory requirements or things that need to be dealt with. But I think the wording, because in looking at other procedural bylaws of other regional districts, they have a combination. There's some that do almost have the exact same wording that we do, and then there's others that the board chair will review, or that the corporate officer with the CAO prepare, or with the direction of board chair or with advisement from the board chair, set out the agendas. So there's a reference to the board chair also reviewing the agendas as they come out or before they come out and published.
Director Beamish?
Yeah, I guess thinking that again, I follow the same process you do as well. I get the agendas before they're published, before they're finalized, and review them. So I do agree. I was thinking actually more of the Planning and Development Committee is no way I'm going to add numbers X, Y, and Z onto that list at the end of the day. So having that, but certainly in the board meetings, I think it's valuable to have the chair participate.
I guess one of the questions that I'd have around all of this is, what is the timing around the agenda process? So internally, you must have to staff that it has to be in to whoever's putting it together by a certain time in advance of the actual publication. So what is the timing in there? Because if we were looking at even addressing any of this or bringing this forward, we need to look at what that timing is and how that would work.
I guess the answer is it depends. Generally speaking, the complete agenda package is ready for the CAO's review on the Friday, which is 13 days, I guess, before the board meeting. However, there are some of those reports that are more complex, that may be several months in the making, going through different concurrences, and depends on what the issue and the complexity is. But generally speaking, the complete agenda package is ready for review by the CAO on the Friday, essentially 2 weeks before the meeting.
And then when is it finalized?
Again, that depends how much work is done or refinement is required on different reports, but we try to have everything ready to go, last minute changes on the Thursday so the agendas can be compiled on the Friday. The Friday, which is immediately before the Thursday committee meeting.
So if the board or the chair was looking to be able to do some review, it would typically be between the Friday when the CAO gets it for review and the Thursday prior to when it actually gets published.
That would probably be the best opportunity. And there's different ways of doing this too. For example, I know at the Cowichan Valley Regional District, they're looking at the agenda cover page And so that is available at an earlier time. Granted, some things change at the last minute sometimes, but the agenda cover page is available at a much earlier time. And so it depends on what is actually expected in this review.
Okay. Any other input from the directors? Director Hills.
Yeah, looking at that, so it's 10 and 1, and whether the chair would have to approve it, is that kind of input or approval of the agenda, I guess is kind of what I'm, that's what I'm wondering about.
Director Pratt.
I think the wording would just be review. I don't think input or approval is, I think it's review because essentially, from what I'm hearing from the mayors of the municipalities, that's really what you do and make suggestions. But I think that the wording would be review.
Director Hills.
So review before public release.
I think you'd want to ensure that there would be time for response from staff. Example, reports coming forward. This is a fairly new board, right? So when we review it, we get the whole thing. It might not have page numbers. It might, might say this report is still coming, not complete, whatever, but we pretty much see the whole thing. But we can then go through that and say, you know what? We need a little bit more information here because there's no background at the table. So you give staff time to pull additional information. What we're looking to do is move the business of the board forward in as quick a time as possible. The more times we have to stop and ask for additional information, the slower everything happens. So that's where the board input is valuable to staff, given, they don't have your eyes. Okay, Director Pratt.
And having been a board chair of a school district, my expectation would never be to see a finalized agenda, even just a draft, is fine. It wouldn't be to see everything, every I dotted and T crossed, just knowing that reports were coming forward on specific things and knowing the questions around the board table. That's just to be clear on that as well for staff.
Okay, any other comments or questions on this? So, would you like to put forward an amendment to this piece? And this is talking about board meetings, not committee meetings. Director McMahon.
So how do the committee meetings differ? Or I'm sorry, I'm getting us off on a sidetrack.
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, if we're looking at putting a different process in for committee too, then we'd have to look at how that happens.
Just to clarify, this particular section does apply to committee meetings. So you'll see under Section 29, Committee Rules of Procedure, and it cross-references the sections that apply to committee.
One of those circular pieces, okay. Any other comments? I'm looking for Director McMahon.
I have a suggestion. So after the first comma, for review by the board chair and approval by the chief administrative officer or the CAO's designate.
Now, if you made it just the board chair, could we just say chair? Because that would then, right? So could you repeat that again? For review?
For review by the chair and approval by the chief administrative officer. And then it goes on as it is.
Okay, but then that's 3 days before the meeting? I think the timing would need to be... Okay, and circulate a copy to each member at least 3 days. Okay, so that's...
Yeah, it works.
So that works. Okay. Maybe, Tara, I could have you read that whole piece if you've got it, once you've got it in there. And then we'll get Angie to make sure it makes sense and we could actually make it work.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. That the following change be made to the new draft to be presented to a next Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting. Change Section 10.1, regular meeting of the board, adding to that section, after regular meeting of the board for review by the chair and approval by the Chief Administrative Officer or the Chief Administrative Officer designate.
Okay, so does that capture what we're looking to capture? Given the process they've indicated, the CAO would have it Friday 13 days before, and then it gets approved Thursday prior to the Friday when it's posted. So does the chair review it before it's approved by the CAO? Director Pratt.
Okay, so there's, I just would want some clarity because I think staff will probably like clarity on this as well, whether or not it is definitely the board chair that you want to review even committee agendas, or if you want it to be the committee chair reviewing each individual committee agenda as well. The timeline, I mean, obviously you'd want it reviewed by the chair, whether it be board chair, committee chair, et cetera, prior to it being approved and sent out. But I think we need to make a distinction for definite whether, because I've heard chair of the committee, but I've also heard board chair, and I think there's got to be, we need to be clear on what, if we want the board chair who's been elected by the board to review all agendas, or whether or not we want the chair of the committee to also be, or to be doing that when they've been appointed. So it's, I just want to be sure that we're clear on what we're asking for, and whether or not it's board chair reviewing the committee agendas and then taking to their committee chairs and saying, okay, this is, if, do you have any questions or comments, or do we want staff to be meeting with each committee chair to review, like when I say staff, I mean the CAO or the acting CAO. So I think I want a little bit of conversation about that piece to make sure we've got that distinction clear, because there's a difference.
Mm-hmm. And I know in our case, and I don't know what you do, but in our case, it's both the chair of the committee and, in this case, the board chair would both review that. And it's not a meeting. Yeah. It gets emailed out. Okay. Gets emailed out, review it, fire it back. Okay.
And the process that I'm familiar with was the board chair and vice chair sat down, did the committee, did all of the committee set up and everything with senior staff, and then the board chair reviewed the committee agendas with the committee chair, and that's how that process worked. Which so I'm open to doing anything that works best for this board. So,
Director Ties.
Well, I'm thinking with the volume of agenda reviews that we need to do, I don't think meeting every time would probably but I think Director Seeger's suggestion is a good one, that the board chair and the committee chair gets an email after the CAO approves it on that Friday 13 days. Or is it the same time? Well, I'd be okay either way, I guess.
Let's go to staff and see how you see this potentially playing out. You've probably got some ideas.
Well, I guess the first point I'd like clarity on is what the board is asking for. Is it the agenda cover sheet, or is it the agenda cover sheet with all of the reports? That's the first question I have to confirm.
Okay. Director McMahon.
I'm thinking what we're looking for, and I'm feeling like I'm sorry that I was doing this on the fly. I apologize. I should have thought this through last night. But I think what we're looking for is a review and approval of the draft agenda by the chair. And so the draft agenda would not be complete necessarily. That's fine, because we understand the process. But I think that is what we want to get into the procedure.
And that would be with as many of the reports that are ready at that time. Okay. Any other comments? So you're saying not the chair of the committee, just the board chair?
No, I'm saying chair, because if we leave it at
Okay.
chair, then we're not throwing everything in the world at Lori.
Okay. Director Lee.
Should we have a time limit just in case, like 1 day or something prior, and then the CIO just approves it after that, if there's no comments coming back?
Thank you. Director McMahon?
That is a good question, but I noticed that the timeline in the bylaw is not very precise, and it's not really exactly what we're doing, which is fine, because it needs to be fairly general to give flexibility.
And I think the timing, and we can refer to staff, but I think the timing would be something that needs to be worked out, and that would be probably coming forward from staff once they figure out how to actually implement this. Okay, and Angie, did you have other questions? Sorry. Did you want to answer your question or ask your question first? Director Beamish?
I'm thinking there are many times when even as mayor I don't get it. I mean, I have the opportunity, but I don't have the time or the availability to review the agenda. Now, sometimes they'll just email them to me, and it's just a cover sheet that they'll look at. I wouldn't want to. I wonder about creating this. Does this create another meeting attendance and therefore another cost to the regional district? I'm going to, or will this constitute the agenda review in place of the agenda review that we currently already do prior to a meeting? Is that what we're talking about here? So.
I can tell you how we do it. We've set it up in the district of Sechelt where we're doing it electronically. So we actually have a folder, just like right now we have folders for agendas on our Surface. We have one for draft agendas. So staff puts that in there, sends us an email saying the draft is in the folder, and we can access it, review it, fire back with comments, or just say, yep, it's good to go, or you're missing this page, or whatever, something's numbered wrong. Or
that to me would be a sensible way to do it, not have a kind of a sit down with it sort of thing, just so it's as easy as possible.
Yeah, and the email that comes out may say, this report is still in process. It'll be coming forward. It's not part of the package at this point. We're waiting for information on such and such or whatever. And so, so when we go through it, we know what's there, what's not there. All right. Okay. Director Matt.
I don't remember seeing our agenda review meetings that we've been having in the bylaw, or am I just hallucinating?
No, they're not in the bylaw.
I think the important thing is to insert the chair's participation in the process earlier in the process so that they have a say in how the agenda is constructed.
All right. Any other questions from Angie on this?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Could we have the recommendation that's been put forward? And then we'll see if we have a seconder for it.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. Amend Section 10.1 to add wording. We'll prepare an agenda before every regular meeting of the board for review by the chair and approval by the Chief Administrative Officer or the Chief Administrative Officer's designate.
Second, okay. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. So that's number 10. Anything else in the agenda? Director McMahon.
In 11, the order of proceedings, one of my questions is, actually, I don't think, it's public inquiries in there, but it's, why are public inquiries after adjournment? That doesn't seem to be the case at other meetings I have attended.
Staff?
Thank you. There are different ways, of course, to accomplish different things. Generally speaking, I think in the corporate administration world, public inquiries aren't necessarily part of the business. Like, you're not making decisions about the public inquiries necessarily. So depending on how different organizations do it differently, they might have input at the beginning of the meeting, before the meeting starts, or right at the beginning of the meeting, so people have the opportunity to make comments to influence decisions on the agenda. Some organizations just do it at the end and have parameters that it's only 4 items on the agenda. At the SCRD, it's been more of an informal process where it is at the end of the meeting, but not limited necessarily to things that are on the agenda, so it can be a broader opportunity for public input. That was just the decision at the time.
Director Beamish?
Well, 2 things about the inquiries. One is that we have the inquiries on our agenda package, on the agenda itself, and we also are recording the name of the inquirer and the subject matter, just so that it's a record, and it may actually lead to an action later on, the inquiry. So we do see it as part of the business meeting that comes up. And we also, we distinguish between the committee meetings and the council meetings. At the council meeting, we have the 2 inquiry opportunities because we're making decisions. And so the first one is the recommendation comes prior to the reports being discussed, so that people have the opportunity to have questions or about the reports that we can factor into our thinking. The other one comes after, and that's about any other things that they want to discuss. And at committees, we only have the one opportunity, and that's at the end of the meeting for any other items that they want to discuss, because we're not making decisions at committee, we're just making recommendations. So the recommendation that comes forward to council from a committee could be something that people want to raise to us. So, but we do include it as on the agenda, and we do now record the names and the subject matter. And again, it's just really Bill Beamish asked a question about garbage, and it's really as simple as that sort of thing, as opposed to ignoring the fact that was part of the meeting. And so, my comments.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Director.
Okay.
Pratt.
All right. So, school district, similar as what Gibson's has recently adopted, except at the school district they do the question period at the beginning of the meeting can be about anything, and the question period at the end of the meeting is only specifically to items that happened on the agenda of that meeting. So that way, if there's a general question or a general statement, that can get brought up at the beginning, and then at the end of the meeting, it's just anything that happened. I personally would like to see public question period brought into the meat of the agenda, and I'm happy to hear other comments on when and where, and on whether or not it's specifically limited to the items on the agenda. I think from a timeliness factor, it's got to be limited. If we're going to bring it into the agenda, that we should be looking at it just being related to items on the agenda. If people want to stay around after and ask other questions, I mean, we've always been available for that. But I would like to see the public question period brought up into the meat of the agenda.
I'm going to weigh in on this one. I remember a couple of years ago, we were talking about having our question and answer period as part of the meeting before adjournment, and I remember we got some legal advice on that. And at that time, we were told don't do it, and the reasons why. But I don't remember what all that is at this point. But it was something to do with the impact on decisions made. So, I mean, I would say that I would like to see some legal advice on this before we go ahead and include that, just to make sure. I mean, rules have changed maybe, right, around that, but are there any legal implications by bringing it in as part of the actual meeting? Director Pratt.
The other piece is now that we are publicizing our recordings and going and later today, if the budget all goes through, we'll be looking at video streaming as well, and that so then you get into privacy issues. So that is something else to consider. Having everything we've already said, if you bring it into the public, if you're bringing the question period into that public meeting, then you have to worry about or the people that may be in the audience may not wish to be publicized and may not talk anyway. So,
Director Mann.
I would like to see public inquiries on the agenda. I realize we may wish to distinguish between committees and the board. The optics are really awful of not having public inquiries even on the agenda. And the idea that, we're not going to listen to the public until after we've closed off the meeting, it just doesn't look good. I realize that we should get a legal opinion. I'd be okay with limiting public inquiries as part of the agenda to items on the agenda. That also makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, so perhaps we could request staff seek a legal opinion around adding the question and answer session into the agenda, and also address does it matter, or does it impact where it is in the agenda given decisions are being made, and we're looking at both committee and board agendas. Director Beamish?
The one caution I have, and we had to address this as well, is there are occasions where we'll have had a public inquiry formally under the bylaw or something, and that and because the board can't receive additional information after that inquiry, you have to make sure that the inquirers are not. So we actually would hold an inquiry, small I inquiry, on the agenda after public inquiry matter has been dealt with. A formal public inquiry matter has been dealt with, so they can't ask questions about that before council makes a decision. So you have to manage that a little bit.
You're talking about public hearing?
Public hearings, sorry,
Public
public
hearings,
hearings, yeah. After formal, you've got to caution that you don't get the public hearing matters.
Right, okay. Director Lee?
I think we have to be careful where we put public inquiries in, because those agendas are posted before, and so a public inquiry could be designed to influence our thinking ahead of time. So if we're talking about a committee meeting, a public inquiry can be addressed at any time, and just say we're going to follow up at the next one of these meetings and not deal with it till then. So I guess where the public inquiry comes in on a committee meeting is one thing, but where it comes in on a regular board meeting is another thing. Typically, everything that goes to the regular board meeting has been heard at a committee. And because at a committee we can have second thoughts, at a board meeting we can't have second thoughts. We're down to deciding on things. So public inquiries at a board meeting are probably different animals than a public inquiry at a committee meeting.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, so do we want to make this motion? We have some wording, I think, but it's not actually a motion because it hasn't been seconded. But how about if we hear what what was put forward? Tara?
Thank you, Chair Seegers. Excuse me. That staff seek legal opinion of adding public inquiry into agendas and what the impact would be to any decisions made in the agenda.
And I think we're looking at either for both committee and board, because it could be different at each given where we are in a process. And would someone like to make that recommendation? Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Next in the agenda, or this procedure bylaw, is there anything else? Director Hills.
And number 11 in JKL. I'm seeing as kind of a housekeeping. In camera is no longer the language. Closed meetings is the language, and that refers to section 14. So I don't know if you need a motion to do a housekeeping change.
Yes. And staff? How would you like us to deal with that?
I don't think that there's anything necessary at this point.
So that'll just get changed automatically as it comes forward, given the verbiage change?
If the board would like to make the change so that the agenda says closed meetings instead of in camera,
Yes.
then we should probably have a motion to amend the bylaw.
Okay, Director Hiltz, would you like to make that?
Yes, I'd make that motion to have in-camera change to closed meetings.
Okay, and we could just say in the bylaw.
Yes,
it would-
references to in-camera be referred to as closed meetings.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconder, any other discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. And then, any others? Director Hiltz, and we'll come back to you after.
It's about the land acknowledgements. Right now, it's a custom, and after the Squamish Forum and the discussions there, that the Squamish Nation felt, the people that I spoke with found that the land acknowledgements were a significant part of the truth part of Truth and Reconciliation. So I'm wondering if we could add the land acknowledgement as a formal part, as part of the truth part of the Truth and Reconciliation. That's kind of my question, is to make it formal, to put it in the agenda, to say that this is an important part, and it's no longer optional. It's not a custom. It's a practice. So I'm putting that up for discussion.
And where would you like to see that show up in the agenda then, or in the order?
Right now we do it, where does it comes?
Typically after the call to order is when we...
Typically after call to order. That seems to be the appropriate place where the custom is holding it right now. And that would seem to be appropriate location after call to order.
Okay. Any comments? Director Pratt?
I'm not sure if we would need a legal acknowledgement of that as well, or need a legal advice on that, because we want to make sure that we're treading appropriately there, and maybe that's a question because for example, I'm just thinking the wording of our acknowledgement, it was vetted by legal as well. And that might, if we're going to be adopting this as a procedural bylaw, and adopting that in, I'm in favor of it, but I do think that maybe it might be something we need to run past legal to make sure that it can be legally put into without any implications.
Director Hiltz?
So further information about the location and the appropriateness of a land acknowledgement in the orders of business.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that?
So the motion would be for staff to review the placement of land acknowledgement in the order of business. Then.
With legal?
I suppose it would be, however staff feels that they need to do it, if it's a legal opinion or similar to what we were doing with
The question and answer
the
period?
question and answer period.
And staff, would you like it to read that gets reviewed with legal, or should we leave that up to your discretion?
I think that can be left to our discretion, and if I have follow-up conversations with legal, that it can, but I don't think it's actually has any legal implications at this time. So.
Thank you. Okay. Is there a seconder? Seconded? Any other discussions? So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Is there anything else on number 11? All right, Director of Command, what number are you looking at next?
I'm on 12.
12, okay. Number 12.
12 is that delegations are limited to a maximum of 10 minutes unless agreed to by a 2/3 vote of those members present. Again, this is something we haven't been doing, so I just wanted to flag it to folks' attention.
Okay. Any comments? Director Hiltz?
We have used it in the past. I even remember seeing a timer set at one point in the meeting. So I think it's just the requirement of the chair to remind people of the 10 minutes. So I think it's just lack of reminding in the past opposed to not doing it.
Director Ties?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to have a guideline like that in place so that delegations know they should be at 10 minutes. And then, of course, if they take 11 or 12 or 13 minutes, then it's not a big deal. But if we don't have a guideline like that in place, then things can go unravel pretty quickly.
So I have a question for the committee here. So we're talking 10 minutes. Is that 10 minutes for their presentation, or is that 10 minutes including questions? Director Beamish.
I think it's for the presentation would be my interpretation, because we tend to rattle on.
Any other discussion on this one? Are there any changes that anyone's looking to make? Director Hiltz?
It's in 12.1 and 2. It's the advance notice that a delegate has to give this 2 weeks. So it seems to be sometimes a difficult thing because the agenda doesn't come out, so people don't know what's coming up. So there's this lag. You kind of have to know in ahead in order to be able to speak to something on the agenda, but you don't know if it's on the agenda because the agenda hasn't been published until the week before. So there's always this. So I'm wondering if there's enough discretion in the chair to accept delegations.
Director McMahon?
I'm inclined to think that subsection 2 covers that notwithstanding 1, the chair may grant the delegation an opportunity to be heard. I think that kind of covers it off.
Yeah.
Director Pratt?
Well, and we had an example of this when we had the user groups in, and I mean that's the perfect example where 2 were on the list as a delegation, and then it added 2 additional questions, and the chair of the committee invited them to the other people to speak briefly on to their experiences. So we've already seen this in practice. So I think. You know, and I mean, that was really informal and it was very short, but I think there would be a mutiny at the board level if the chair wasn't doing the will of the board, whether it's a committee chair or a board chair. So we're pretty vocal people.
And any other comments on number 12? All right, next item. What's the next number, Director McMahon?
I'm on 14. Anybody? On number 14, we have a peculiar sentence that I wondered was a typo. So the corporate officer must review and determine whether to seek a board resolution for the release of closed minutes and related information that would no longer undermine the reason for discussing it in a closed meeting. Undermine? Is that the right word?
And staff, did you want to comment on that?
I personally don't have a problem, but that an alternative might be compromise the reason, or it's more of an issue of the board's comfort with the wording, but I think I think the intent is clear.
This is basically talking about, at some point, if the matter is concluded and it doesn't need to stay in closed anymore, that it can come out. And this is, I think this is a question we brought up with staff a few weeks ago, where we said that, we asked, do they go through old closed meeting agendas and determine if there is information that can now be brought out or not, right? So I think that's referring to that. Do you have an alternate wording that you?
I found it a very awkward sentence, and was hoping for a rescue.
Director Hills.
The word does sound, undermine sounds like underhanded, and I'm thinking from our point of view of board, it might make sense, but from the public reading it, I get the sense that undermine, a word like challenged, the decision making might be more understandable to the public. But yeah, I feel that undermining is kind of an odd word. Yeah. Even though the intent is understood, I'm just thinking about who else might be reading the procedure. So challenge is the word. It's about challenging the decision. So there's something about that in it. Yeah.
So it's almost like we would, the corporate officer is to regularly review closed meeting minutes and determine whether to seek a board resolution for the release of, and it's not the closed minutes, it's the recommendations, right? Because we don't bring the whole thing out. It's just the recommendations that come out. Angie?
That's correct. I think a recommendation for staff to bring back some revised wording to clarify, and then we can wordsmith.
Perfect.
Outside of the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. So it's been moved that staff review item 14.3 and come back with revised wording to committee. Director Hills?
I would say the plain language aspect of it, to bring the plain language to that statement, would be I think the key that Director McMahon is referring to.
I think staff have got that piece. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded? Any other questions? Comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Next. Go ahead.
See, this is what happens when I really prepare. Under 18, sub 8, a member who has made a substantive motion. I looked that up online, and I'm still confused about what a substantive motion is. In this context, I got a lot of parliamentary stuff, but I don't get what a substantive motion is at the SCRD.
Staff, do you have any clarification on this one?
I think that's one of those very subjective terms, but with the assistance of the chair and the corporate officer, there could be some dialogue at the time if there was a question of procedure at that time as to whether a motion was substantive or not. It could be dealt with at the time.
As opposed to a frivolous motion.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have any others?
Yeah, I did have one more in 25, notice of committee meetings. Right now, actually, it doesn't say under notice of committee meetings that advisory committee meetings have to be posted on the website, although they are posted, like the Transportation Committee and so forth. But the advisory committee, the APC minutes or agendas are not posted. And I would really like to see them posted, whether it's necessary to put it in here or to put in here as a policy that all the advisory committee agendas will be posted on the website.
So reflecting what is in the other section, I don't remember what number it is, but where it says that they would also go on the website. So have that piece come forward. Yes, Angie?
I'd suggest it doesn't necessarily belong in the board procedures bylaw, and that perhaps you could request that staff look into, if you wanted it as a board policy, that might be a better option, or staff can just take that advice back and work with staff on the best way to do that and resourcing that appropriately.
So there is a section in here, though, on notice of committee meetings, and it does talk about advisory committee meetings. So I think that's why this has come up as a conversation here. Okay. Director McMahon, how would you like to proceed with this?
I'm actually fine with what Angie suggests.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you like to make a motion?
Oh, what she said? Can I do that?
So that something like staff review section 25 and come back with a recommendation to the committee with regards to posting of committee and advisory committee meetings.
Sorry, it's posting of advisory committee agendas, which might better be addressed through procedures rather than the bylaw.
Okay. Director Hiltz?
Is it the Advisory Planning Commission or the Advisory Planning Committee?
Both. I
Okay.
assume that APCs are advisory committees.
But I
Do
think-
they not fall under here, under notice of advisory committee meetings?
This says committees, and I think it's a commission, so I don't know if there's a difference.
So what you're saying is you would like the agendas of the committees and the commissions posted somewhere, and you don't know how to have that happen. You'd like staff to look at how to make that happen and bring back recommendation to committee. Okay. And that's sort of a motion. Good thing these things are taped, right? Okay, so that's a motion that I don't know what Tara's got written down, but I think she'll figure something out that works. Do you want to read it? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. That staff review section 25 with regards to the posting of committee and advisory committee meeting agendas to the public.
I think and bring that back to committee. I think that's part of it, but it would come back to committee because this will have to come back with the revisions, right?
As long as it's understood that it's the committee, because you're specifically interested in the APC, which is not a committee but a commission. So as long as it's clear that it includes the commissions, that's.
I think it says committee and commissions. Is that correct? What do you have in there for wording?
Staff review section 25 with regards to the posting of committee and advisory committee meeting agendas to the public.
Okay, I think we're looking for commission meetings as well. Okay. So would someone like to make that motion? Moved and seconded. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. I wanted to point out something that I found in section 25, establishment of committees. I pointed this out during our agenda review this morning. In number 2 and 3, in 2 it says that the board chair may establish standing committees and may appoint members to those committees. And then number 3, the board may appoint select committees. That's the exact opposite of what we do in the municipalities. So the standing committees in the municipalities, I mean, they're long-standing committees. They're actually set up by the council. But select committees are by the mayor because they're short-term and specific. So this is the exact opposite. So I actually checked the wording, and this is what the wording is in the legislation for regional districts. But then there's another point in there under the establishment committees. So it says that persons who are not directors may be appointed by the board to a select committee or by a chair to a standing committee. Now, we do have this set up this way for things like the transportation and the policing committees, right? We have other people on there. But it actually would open it up that even this committee, this is a standing committee, could be a committee where we had people who are not directors on it. So I'm not looking to make a change, right? But I wanted you to think about that just know that that's it's open to us going forward if there was something else that we wanted to set up a committee for. It might be solid waste, it might be water, it might be whatever, but we have the ability to set up committees that would have members of the public on them and not necessarily the directors. Okay? That's all I wanted to say on that one. Any other points in this procedure bylaw that anybody would like to address? We're done? Awesome. All right, it is 11:05. I'm going to call a 5-minute break. Let everybody take a break, and we'll come back and get into the grant and aid and the final pieces. Thank you. Over to Tina Pearl.
Thank you, Chair. So the 2019 Rural Areas Grant and Aid process has been advertised publicly, and application deadlines are approaching at the end of March. So once the applications have been received, they'll be distributed to the electoral area directors, which they'll do and to assist in the deliberations. Thank you.
Okay, so we reviewed this this morning, and if you look on page 30, 3.1.
A preliminary review of the applications. There is a formal review committee meeting scheduled for the end of April. But prior to that, typically what happens is the electoral area directors may have a community consultative process to assist them in their deliberations. So for consistency and transparency, staff have provided a format for a potential community consultative committee as referenced in item 5, the terms of reference for the Rural Areas Grant and Aid Review. So staff are here to provide any questions.
Talks about a committee. So it would be one director representing a particular electoral area and 4 volunteer members at large appointed by the electoral area director. And the last piece in this package indicates that committee members must declare any conflicts of interest and absent themselves. So the way the process works is you as an electoral area director will get the requests for grant and aid in your area. You have the choice to set up a committee or not. If you do set up a committee, you would meet with your committee. They would need to keep your deliberations confidential. Then as a board, we would come together in a closed meeting where you can then share the information with each other so that you can compare asks and potential awards, and then come to a solution or conclusion, which would then come out into open meeting with the awards. Okay, so any questions then on the process? Director McMahon.
I'm just curious about past practice. Have any of the rural areas been setting up grant and aid review committees?
Staff?
Yes, so past practice is one of the reasons for having the actual formal terms of reference in a public session. So what has happened is that some rural areas have had committees. And what has been later discovered is perhaps someone sitting on that particular committee actually is sitting on another community group that is actually deciding on their own. So it's more for transparency. It's to also advise the grantors to make sure that they also understand who's going to be reviewing their particular proposals. So it's just to add an element of transparency, accountability, etc. So yes, there have been past committees.
Director Hiltz?
So I'm understanding this is a first. The RAGIA, I think is what we're calling it, the acronym, RAGIA. This is a first, and this is coming out of the auditor's management letter from 2017, which was the GIA policy and update. And this is I'm just making sure that this is the thread that we're following.
Staff?
So there were several recommendations from the auditors when there was actually a board-related request for the auditors to have a review of the rural grant and aid process. So this was one of the items out in that particular process that was identified as a process improvement recommendation from the auditors.
And committee, any other questions? Director Lee?
It's more of a comment. Area A has had this type of committee for as long as I can remember, and it does work quite well. So, and it works pretty much the way it's listed here, so I'm pretty happy with the way it's written.
Yeah, we have, I believe Gibson's follows the same process for our we call it Community Investment Program, but it's a grant and aid, basically. One of our counselors sits as the chair of that, and then we actually advertise for people to come forward to be on that committee. And they do their deliberation. Staff take minutes at that. Those minutes will come forward, and then council makes the final decision. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, looking at the terms of reference, so potentially that each rural area could have one of these committees, I think is the intent. But I'm starting to wonder about the Greater Gibson's participation, the E and F, and has that become another RAGIA committee? So I'm not quite clear. I was getting a little bit mixed up in the terms of references. It's an optional thing for a rural director to do it, and the potential is for 5 rural directors. And I'm just wondering about that EF and the Greater Gibson's one. Could that be another place that you strike one of these review committees?
And staff?
I think historically there's very few items that happen outside of those, so I think that typically they're very specific. So for instance, Greater Gibson's Sea Cavalcade. So I think that because you have the secondary review process where all the rural area directors get together, that typically that's where those things are addressed. So I'm not sure there would be a requirement. You could if you would like, but typically there's very little activity in those particular functions.
I know at the meeting this morning, the review committee review meeting, agenda review meeting, whatever, I raised that Director McMahon and Director Hiltz had both indicated those other pools, basically, and that they had requested information on what typically gets paid out of those. So if you would like staff to bring forward information on what they typically fund, perhaps you could make that request via motion and staff can put something together for you. So for example, the Sea Cavalcade, some of the others have been set up for specific things as well. Do you want to know that information? Director Hiltz.
I guess it'd be a question for staff. So those would be the E and F and are received through the regular grant and aid process, like Sea Cavalcade would be doing a grant and aid process, filling in the same application form?
Yes. Nodding your head, yes. Okay. Director McMahon.
At the moment, I'm okay with how things are rolling out. Well, I think we'll figure it out as we go. And I don't know whether I will set up a committee or not. I think I'll wait and see what kind of volume of applications and how complicated they are and so forth.
Okay, so then let's just ask staff on timing. So when does the receipt of applications close? When would they be coming out? When do they have to have the information? And when is that special meeting set up so that they know what the timeline is?
So at the end of the month, the applications are the deadline for the applications, so on Friday. But again, it says April 1st. So again, staff will then collate the various applications and distribute them to the various rural areas directors. So we'll get all those packaged probably by late that week. And then so the actual committee, the in-camera closed session, is scheduled for, I believe, April the 30th. It was originally scheduled for May the 2nd, but we had a change in date. And so those decisions then become public at the May Corporate and Administrative Services Committee. And then per the policy, they're typically paid on August the 1st, unless a community group has some requirement to get paid ahead of time. So it would have to be in that April window.
Perfect. Any questions? Director Ties.
Yeah, just a wording question here. On 3.1, the committee will consist of up to 5 regular members, but then when you go into A and B, there's actually no flexibility. So maybe it should say 1 director, and then in B it should say up to 4 volunteer members at large, rather than 4 volunteer members at large.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Director Hiltz?
The way I was reading the 4 is that in order for the transparency, you don't, the 4 is the minimum, so you don't want to have a committee of the director and 1 person. So that was my understanding of the reading, is the intent is to let the public know that this committee, and that if they do start a committee, that it'll be a director and 4, not the director and 1. So that the 4 makes it more accountable. That was kind of how I was reading the proposal.
Right, and what Director Hiltz is saying is 3.1, the premise of it says up to 5. So there's just an inconsistency between the two. Director Ties, sorry. Okay, so you're proposing that it be up to 4 volunteer members at large in 3.1B.
Yeah, either that, or you should say at least 5, if that's what Director Hiltz is suggesting. But either way, there's an inconsistency in the wording across the 3.1.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, so that would be my, as a minimum of 5, or just 5. That if you're going to have this committee, it's going to have 5 people, not up to. So that's why there must be some minimum number in order for this to be an accountable committee. And is 4 the minimum, or is 2 the minimum? So I'm reading it that you want 5 people on this, not up to, but you want 5.
Actually, you don't need to have a committee. It could
And
be
you don't
1.
have to. Yeah, it could be a committee of 1.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's the discretion of the rural director.
That's right. So you're saying, so what you're saying, what I'm hearing Director Ties say is he'd be okay if it was 3 or 4. Then you're saying if you're going to have a committee, you have to have 5.
I'm trying to understand what that number is from the auditor's perspective of what they consider to be accountable.
Director Beamish?
It might be a minimum of 3, where a committee is going to be established, a minimum of 3. That way you've got the odd number, and then including the director. That way you've got the odd number, so that you could have 5, you get 7, whatever the director wants. But if you had a minimum of 3, you've at least got an odd number, including the director.
What would you like to propose?
Well, I guess I'll make a motion with a minimum of 3. I don't think we need to have at least 5 members. Personally, I can think of 3 logical choices to put on my committee right now. It may be difficult to find somebody, a 4th or a 5th or that kind of thing. So, maybe we'll say at least 3 and 1 director.
So 3.1 could read, the committee will consist of at least 3 and up to 5 regular members as follows. There'll be 1 director and up to 4 volunteer members at large. Does that work?
I don't know if I'd put a maximum in. If the director really wants 15 people on his selection committee, well then, that's up to the director.
Director Pratt.
Okay, let us keep in mind that this is an advisory committee only, and yes, and they're just making recommendations to the rural director about the rural grant and aid funds. So a committee of up to 5 is more than sufficient. If the director wants to have 1, 2, 3, I think Director Tice's comments of just cleaning up, just putting 3.1 B up to 4 volunteer members at large, because essentially at the end of the day, it is up to the rural director. It is not up to a vote. If they want to do it as a democratic process and they end up with a tie, then they need to use their discretion on how to move something forward. But it is, I really appreciate the terms of reference for the review committee, but I don't want us to overcomplicate in the minutia of this. I think just with that one little cleanup language, and then I think we're probably good and can cover everything else off.
Tina?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I also just wanted to comment that the auditors were not prescriptive. It was more about the transparency and understanding that the public would understand the who, what, where, and how their proposals were being evaluated, or their applications.
Thank you. So what would you like to propose? We never did get a seconder for anything that was on, so what would you like it to say?
What Lori said. Up to, and in 3.1B, up to 4 members.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Second. Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you. So let's go back to page 28. So there is a recommendation there. Tina?
We would recommend that the second part, and that the Rural Grant and Aid Advisory Committee terms of reference be approved as amended.
Yes. So moved. Seconded. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. And then, yes, Tina? Or Tara, sorry.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. In terms of receiving the grant applications, just to provide a date and a little bit of parameter around that, it will come out as an in-camera agenda package, and hope to have that out by April the 9th, which hopefully will give enough time to directors to deliberate before the April 30th meeting.
All right, so I would look, is there any new business? No new business? So I'd look for a motion that we move into closed meeting and the public be excluded from attendance in accordance with Section 91C of the Community Charter, Labor Relations, or other employee relations. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And any questions from the gallery? Sophie, any questions for us?
Yeah, I guess just on the last item there, so this optional committee, that would take, since it hasn't been approved, it would take effect next year?
I don't think so. Tina?
No, we would probably, we're presenting it now in consideration for the 2019 process.
Would direct. Okay.
For me, it'll just depend on the applications that come forward.
And that's the same for me.
And Area F as well.
Any other questions?
I guess just on the board procedures bylaw, just the changing in the wording from in-camera to closed meeting. Just wanted, just curious about why that change.
Legislation has changed. Provincial legislation has changed. So it's just to bring it into alignment with the provincial legislation.
And then just a quick question with regards to grants, and Brampton's Hall specifically.
That would be for staff. And that was GM Hall basically said he'd followed up and they're expecting notice imminently. That don't know what that means. He probably doesn't either. If that's what they said, it's there in their process is all they're saying. Perfect.
And then I guess this, another question just about the awarding of the contract for the Seashell Aquatic Center, and I guess that would also be something that Paul would
Yes.
respond to. And I guess one thing I would just curious about trying to kind of seek clarity on that discussion around whether or not why the other bids couldn't be included in publicly, the amounts and the names of the bidders. Particularly interested since it was suggested by Mayor Beamish and Seegers that is something, or at least in Seashell, it's something that does occur.
I don't think it's that it can't be. I think past practice has been that it hasn't been. And so staff is just going to get clarity so they make sure that they follow the freedom of information requirements, that information that can be given is given, but not stuff that can't be given being brought forward. So they're just going to get clear about process to be able to make sure that they stay within the legislation. Perfect. Thank you. So we'll take a couple of minutes break, and then we'll go into our closed meeting.